that when they heard that lie spoken, they could address the heart of that issue and pivot back to why that voter should vote for Tim Sheehy. So we were out there to win votes for Tim, and we did. We got him, helped him get across the finish line. You may have heard him earlier.
I did.
He gives us lots of credit for that victory, and he considers our work almost commensurate to the door-to-door work they did in Iraq and Mogadishu. But ours is war by, politics is war by other means. We fight in the battlefield of ideas. We do it with a certain set of core principles of integrity among them prominent. And we were able to win votes for Tim and refute the lie. And the evidence was in. We won by eight plus points, and we have a great U.S. Senator representing Montana. That, to me, is one of my crowning achievements in my 30-plus years in activism.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm David Fromm, your host. For countless immigrants, coming to America through Ellis Island symbolized more than just a fresh start. It was a gateway to freedom and opportunity, a place where hopes and dreams converged. But for some, it wasn't just about seeking a better life. It was about escaping some of the darkest times in world history. For those fleeing the persecution of the Nazis during World War II, the journey to America was not merely a search for prosperity, it was a fight for survival. As they were coming into New York Harbor and saw the Statue of Liberty, which stands as a symbol of hope and freedom, they knew that they had the promise of refuge and a new beginning. As they arrived at Ellis Island, many only came with little more than the clothes on their backs and a story of resilience. These immigrants brought with them a living history of courage and loss, determined to embrace the opportunities this new land offered, while never forgetting the struggles that had brought them to America. Today's guests' parents were among the immigrants who came to America during this time, inspiring him to work on various issues to defend the American dream. I want to welcome to the podcast Henry Kriegel, who is Americans for Prosperity, Montana's Deputy State Director. Henry, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man. I'm so excited to kind of talk about this story. I think, we were talking, I had family members a little further back than parents who went through Ellis Island. And, I'm always captivated by those stories of, the boat coming through the harbor, seeing Lady Liberty and what they went through, and just that courage that so many just regular people were taken, I think is amazing. So your parents immigrated from Poland, right? During World War II. What was it like for them before they came to America?
That's a good question. First of all, just hearing the intro, I kind of tear up a little bit even thinking about the story, to be quite frank with you. My parents were teenagers when the war broke out. And my mom was 12 and my dad was 19. And they grew up in neighboring villages. My mom's folks were pretty wealthy landowners, and my dad lived more closer to the city. They had their stories of heroism, and particularly my mother's. My dad fought with the Polish resistance ultimately. My mom survived 8 labor camps.
Wow.
And her brother, my uncle, was killed 3 days before the liberation. And then my mom assumed the leadership in her family. And her stories of heroism, how she kept her younger sister and relatives and others together to survive that time, wow, that is something else. I did not know that about my mom. And you know how I realized that was before I came on the American Potential last time. I watched some of the videos that I arranged for her to be interviewed by the Shoah Foundation, Steve Spielberg's operation, where they document the life stories of survivors. And I am super impressed with what the resilience my mom showed and the heart and intelligence that she displayed to help herself and others survive during that time and come to the U.S.
Wow. How cool that you're able to kind of capture that and that you're able to hear it from her, because so often that stuff's kind of lost to history. We don't always hear it. So the fact that you're able to have that captured and listen to that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was almost serendipitous. I went to a program at the local university where I live with my stepson, and Eleanor Rosenzweig, who was in the movie Freedom Riders. She came out and gave the talk about surviving the Holocaust. At the very end of her talk, she mentioned that the Shoah Foundation had $1 million left to interview teen survivors of the war.
Wow.
And I asked her about it afterwards. So my mom qualified for that, and my dad barely did. But they flew out a couple of days heads up, and they did the interview, and that's how their stories are preserved.
That's amazing. Wow. So they came through Ellis Island. What do they have any? Did they ever talk about what it was like coming?
Yes, they
through
did.
Ellis Island?
They did. My mom, in particular, it was kind of a bittersweet moment for them because the joy and anticipation of having freedom, coming to the America for freedom and opportunity, but also remembering the loss they suffered, back in Poland with the loss of their entire family. They were sole survivors of their respective families.
Wow.
And so it was bittersweet, but filled with hope and anticipation.
So, yeah, I kind of would put myself in the shoes of so many immigrants like that. It's got to be a mix of feelings, and particularly with that incredible tragedy right behind them. That's pretty amazing. I mean, being the sole survivors, I didn't realize that. Wow. But so your dad worked with a family member, is my understanding. What did he do, and then how did they eventually start their own business and make their way?
That's a good question. So my dad's sponsor was a pretty distant uncle who had a company down in the garment district of New York. You're probably familiar with that, like 33rd and 7th Avenue, where you see those guys on those carts, with hangers on them. They'd have the clothing on racks. Well, my dad cut the fabric for use for making suits and that kind of thing. So he was a fabric cutter. But he was getting paid half the wages of his fellow co-workers because the uncle thought he could do that because, after all, he sponsored him. And back in the day, if you to come to America, you had to have sponsorship. You had to be disease-free. You had to have a place to live. So the uncle thought he could pay him half the wages, and my dad didn't sit well with my dad. Sat even less well with my mom.
Yeah.
But my dad said, "No, I'm just going to go off and do my own thing." And he studied to become he wanted to become an architect, but they didn't have the resources to do that. So he became an interior designer and opened up his own shop just in Yonkers, New York, in a pretty lower class area. But it was his own business. And he just built it from the ground up with my mom providing the back end support. She did the sewing and that kind of thing and managed the employees and whatnot. So they built it from nothing. And I used to go to school in a private school nearby, and I'd come back and I'd be at the store with them with my brothers, and we just did it like a family business. Yeah, that's how they did it.
And so he built up a business, kind of made their way, raised their kids. Kind of, it's really the American dream. What did they? I mean, how did they think about their past life, and how did that influence?
Well, that's a really good question.
How did you see that influence how they made their way in America?
Back when I was growing up, it wasn't like part of the culture to talk about those experiences. In fact, it was almost like an eerie silence about it. We knew they suffered some significant tragedy. We didn't really talk about it. My mom would watch like documentaries on TV about it, but we didn't discuss it. It impacted their life in that they were very dedicated to the family. They were dedicated for us getting an education. They wanted us to leverage the opportunities here in this country. They never asked for any handout ever from anybody. We always worked for what we got. And, they were just hardworking people.
Yep. So obviously you then went on studying college. Did they have an influence over what you decided to study or what you decided to
Not
get
really.
into?
I actually went to college to pursue a counseling degree in psychology. Ultimately, going to Columbia University.
Yeah,
and
excellent school.
Back in the day, it was good, and but something happened in 1980 Ronald Reagan got elected president.
Yeah.
And it was a new dawn for America. And I was really taken in with that. And I decided to start my own group on campus and ultimately aligned with Young Americans for Freedom.
Yeah.
And started the chapter there. And we had a lot of followers. And we applied for membership in Earl Hall, which was the philanthropic center of the university. And we were accepted in that Earl Hall initially. But then they changed the steering committee because we were accepted. Then we got voted out because they were afraid of our free speech.
Yeah.
And I challenged them in the meeting about their fear of what we would do, that they had really little right to impede upon our free speech in assembly. Well, there was a local newspaper reporter in that meeting, and that led to some media coverage, and ultimately it got on the front page of the local newspaper, and it was kind of cool. And my daughter dug out the photo of the front page of that newspaper recently, and I put it on Facebook, and people really loved the story. So, the irony about that is we got kicked out because we were talking about a strong America, a free market system. At that time, we were pro-life, and we were thrown out of the Earl Hall. But today, you can have people, encouraging violence, taking over student buildings, intimidating fellow students, shutting down the university, and they are heralded as heroes. That, to me, is the ultimate irony.
Yeah.
Of what's going on today in our college campuses.
Well, yeah, things seem a little backwards. I mean, I think
crazy.
I think a lot of, I have kids in college and had one graduate already. And, one of the factors to take into account is like, what's that experience going to be like? Are the values that we've tried to instill in them, hopefully they cling to those and grow in those even. But, it's powerful when you have an institution and like their friends and everybody kind of pushing in another direction. It has been a factor as to where we decided to have kids go to school.
Oh, that should be a critical factor.
Yeah. So fast forward. So you after being a rabble rouser in college and making trouble with your radical, strong America and free market views, so you went out to California and heard a doctor talk on something that we haven't talked about here. What was he talking about?
I was doing some odd jobs in between, figuring out the next thing for me to do. So I went to this program where Dr. Robert Simon spoke. He was the head of emergency medicine at UCLA. And he was the first American doctor to visit Afghanistan 5 years after the Soviets invaded.
Wow.
And he came out with these stories and photographs of what the Soviets were doing to the kids, burning them limb by limb in front of the parents to force them to tell them where at the time they were Mujahideen, that's what they were called, Afghan freedom fighters fighting for their country, were located. And these stories were horrific, how the Soviets essentially rolled in. They had a peace and friendship treaty with the government of Afghanistan. They violated all those treaties. They rounded up the intelligentsia, the leadership, the military leadership, those in the universities, and they killed them all. 5 million were instant refugees. And I was really taken in by that because of my parents' background, too.
Yeah.
That this was what they were called as migratory genocide, where people were forced to flee their homeland. And I go, I really want to be a part of it. I really want to do something about it. The next day, there was another program with 2 Afghan survivors, and I said to my friends, I don't want to go unless I can do something about it. Well, it turned out not too long thereafter, I began working with refugee communities, among them Afghans, providing English as a second language training and vocational training. They decided to do a big rally to commemorate the 5th anniversary of the invasion, and I got them international and national media for the first time, in over a couple thousand people at the LA County Courthouse. And from that, I got recruited by the Committee for a Free Afghanistan in D.C. for a 2-week job, which I took. Kind of reminiscent of how I started with AFP, and that's another story.
So did it last 2 weeks, or was
it was
mislabeled?
6 years.
It was mislabeled like your job with AFP.
Well, yeah, right. I had to prove myself in those 2 weeks, but I got a job as the PR director for the Committee for a Free Afghanistan, and ultimately the executive director. And it culminated with my meeting with Ronald Reagan in the White House and some of his cabinet members to talk about endgame strategies in Afghanistan.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing. So a guy whose life was altered by, was what you said, like when you're in college, by Ronald Reagan being elected president. That had to be pretty amazing to you to be able to meet Ronald Reagan and be in such a, it wasn't even ceremonial, is what you're saying. It's like you actually were in the conversation about like what should be happening in Afghanistan. That's phenomenal.
It was amazing. I was the youngest kid in that room, and I was given 4 minutes to make my case on whether the president should guarantee the UN Accords in Afghanistan. And I got maybe 15 minutes. And it was, the president greeted me very warmly, very affable, likable man. But we disagreed on the endgame policy.
Yeah.
And that was fine. He already made his decision before I walked in the room. And we shook him up a little bit in his thinking, but it turned out in the longer run that I had a more accurate view of what would happen in the end game than he did. I don't have any joy in sharing that at all, because I engaged to ensure that the Afghans would have a chance to rebuild their society in a free society, not for us to withdraw and leave them hanging and prone to civil war and unrest and bloodshed for years to come. So I left D.C. after that, not too long thereafter, and moved to Montana because I had friends and I visited very often, and I was done. I had made my contribution, and so I left. Much to the chagrin of Charlie Wilson and his staff, who wanted me to relocate to Peshawar and work with the Afghans on the ground there, and I said, nah, there are too many groups already there.
I think I actually personally have some experience with a lot of Afghans, because my father-in-law happened to grow up as the son of missionaries to Afghanistan, and they were kind of undercover missionaries.
Oh yeah, you got to be.
And my I don't know if it's a grandmother-in-law or whatever, she actually lived in Peshawar for some time. Lived in Pakistan, and in fact, she's buried currently in Kabul next to her husband, who was killed in an accident there. And but just having that insight into that culture and the struggles they've had to deal with, that it's just heartbreaking. But it is such a warm group of people. Like, they're just the most hospitable, kind-hearted people with a lot of resilience. But it's an amazing group of people that unfortunately a lot of people didn't pay attention to. At least in my age, like until conflict comes and there's bombs dropping. Most
people did not even know where Afghanistan was until after 9/11.
Yeah,
and it was a real tragic situation. So I kind of personally re-engaged after 9/11.
Really?
Yes. And I had a friend who turned out to be the registered lobbyist for the Northern Alliance.
Oh,
Commander Massoud's group. And that's who he ultimately aligned with. She and I were in Afghanistan together in '87, and I just called her up out of the blue, and I could tell by her voice that Massoud was killed. He was not just wounded, he was killed.
Yeah.
And that sent the whole Northern Alliance into major disrupt. But in any case, I did re-engage. I engaged in a remote radio tour to help create public pressure on our administration to work with the Northern Alliance to seek retribution on Al-Qaeda and then get the heck out. It took several months for us to do anything, and we actually spent 20 more years than I actually wanted to in that country. But, oh man, another tragic story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, man, that's some important work, in what seems like a remote place, and it is. But then, so you had friends in Montana. Why did you end up moving to Montana?
I was done living in D.C.
That's understandable.
I was done with the hour commute of 10 miles across the 14th Street Bridge. I felt like I made my contribution back in that day, culminated with my visit with President Reagan. Our point of view didn't carry the day. The Soviets did ultimately withdraw, which was a little bit of a surprise to me, but they had to in order to try to survive as a nation. But I felt kind of dejected at the time. I felt like I could do no more. And so why stay in a place where you've already made your contribution? I had friends out in Montana. Open skies, beautiful rivers for fishing, hunting, outdoors, trustworthy people, always wanted to get out of the city, and I said, I am heading to Montana.
Nice.
Yeah,
Well,
before everybody else discovered it.
Yeah, you're kind of you're an early adopter.
Yeah.
So you work as a deputy state director in Montana. You guys have been doing a lot of great stuff. And what have been kind of some of the most meaningful, or at least your favorite things that you've been working on?
By far, number one top thing we did was with AFP Action and getting Tim Sheehy elected as U.S. Senator. We just got a nice call out earlier today from a live interview with the senator.
Yep.
Because we took out a 3-term Democrat incumbent in the most expensive U.S. Senate race in the history of our country, per voter, per vote, and per capita.
Yeah.
And what we did was we just didn't canvass and knock on doors. We trained our people on how to lean into objections. We had a rapid response system for all the various lies that the Tester campaign threw out, and there were a lot of them. We came up with a quick response to them so that our canvassers at the door were confident that when they heard that lie spoken, they could address the heart of that issue and pivot back to why that voter should vote for Tim Sheehy. So we were out there to win votes for Tim, and we did. We got him, helped him get across the finish line. You may have heard him earlier.
I did.
He gives us lots of credit for that victory, and he considers our work almost commensurate to the door-to-door work they did in Iraq and Mogadishu. But ours is war by, politics is war by other means. We fight in the battlefield of ideas. We do it with a certain set of core principles of integrity among them prominent. And we were able to win votes for Tim and refute the lie. And the evidence was in. We won by 8 plus points, and we have a great U.S. Senator representing Montana. That, to me, is one of my crowning achievements in my 30-plus years in activism.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's the future hold for you in AFP Montana?
Well, that's a really good question. We're going to have to defend Senator Daines' seat in 2026. There are a couple of potential high-profile opponents. On a state level, we got the REINS Act. We have a Baby REINS Act that's being voted on today in the state Senate. We got it through the House. We've got ongoing educational freedom battles, which I know you are aware of.
Yep.
We still have to fight those battles. We got pension reform that we're making an incremental move to reform. We got a lot more work to do in that area. We got a lot happening in our state. We got to bring the center-right movement together and try to keep them together so we don't compete with ourselves, so we can get some meaningful transformational bills across the line. We got to get to a flat tax.
Yeah.
We have one of the highest taxes, income tax rates in our region. And it's absurd. We need to bring that down. And we need to get the votes to do that. So we have a lot more work to do in the state of Montana. We have a great team of people on staff. I've assumed more of a mentorship role with some of our younger staff, which I really cherish that role. And I get to do some media and some things that bring me some personal fulfillment, like testify at committee hearings and lobby at the Capitol, which I love to do. It's a beautiful Capitol, and it's a good culture under the dome. So I have a lot of fun in my job, a lot of fun.
Well, I got to think that, the kid of teenagers who were fleeing the Nazis and came over here with nothing, come through Ellis Island, now going and, you're making a difference in the 80s too, and really making a difference now for the people of Montana and then nationally, I think is really kind of inspiring. So
I really appreciate that. Again, when I think about what my parents went through to survive, to get to this country, to give me the opportunity, it does bring me to, I well up a little bit, because not everybody has that legacy.
Yeah.
And I feel like I do this in part to honor my family's legacy and to ensure that others who grow up behind me, my kids, my grandkids, and other kids, and my young staff and their kids have the same opportunity that I had.
That's awesome, man. Henry, I really appreciate you sharing your story and your parents' story with us and for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I do greatly appreciate it.
So, folks, Henry's just has an amazing personal story from his parents escaping the Nazis to coming here to America to pursue their American dream. And now Henry's working to defend that American dream so others can have the same. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear others like it, be sure to stay connected with the podcast by liking and subscribing to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take them for granted. Defend liberty and freedom. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.